You are entering a world filled with darkness you rue, a shadowy void where nightmares come true. A world full of horror, of evil and sins. Between castles and monsters is where hell begins. Where we celebrate the sinister, so push through the thicket. And welcome, dear traveler, to my world of the wicked. It's time for another countdown of creeps, my friends and knaves. Last time on World of the Wicked, we discussed my favorite Disney villains for Halloween. This time, we discuss another group of villains I'm exceptionally fond of, the villains of Batman. If you're familiar with any of my pages, then you're probably well aware by now that I am a huge fan of Batman and his villains. While the number of comics I've read is relatively small compared to some major superhero geeks, I've read my fair share of Batman stories in particular, and seen a lot of adaptations and reimaginings via film, TV, and video games. A common topic people always want to know with Batman is who their favorite characters among his rogues gallery are. Batman's villains are considered possibly the greatest in comic book history, and are a major part of what makes both him and his world so entertaining and engaging. So it's not a surprise this is a common question for fans. Just like with the Disney villains, I've decided to chalk down my top 15 and do it all in one video. With that said, let's waste no more time. Put on your capes and your cowls and join me as I name my top 15 favorite Batman villains. Number 15, Clayface. The history of Clayface in the comics is one of the more fascinating for any Batman villain. Originally, the character was a frustrated actor named Basil Karlo, inspired by horror icons Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney. Karlo gained his evil moniker by donning a grotesque clay mask while carrying out Phantom of the Opera-esque crimes. However, Clayface really made a change with his second incarnation, Matt Hagen, a small-time crook who managed to gain the power of shapeshifting after being transformed into a mass of living clay. Next came Preston Payne, whose clay-like form was unstable and needed to be held together via a special suit. He could kill people with a lethal touch that caused them to turn into clay themselves. And then there was Sandra Fuller, alias Lady Clay, who had similar powers to Hagen but a whole new personality and style. Eventually, Karlo banded all of the Clayfaces together into the Mud Pack, and managed to gain all their powers for himself, thus becoming a sort of ultimate Clayface. In modern years, much of this history has been retconned and streamlined, with Karlo being the one and only Clayface, with powers that are sort of a combination of both Hagen's and Payne's in the past. Media outside of the comics tends to also combine elements of different versions of the character together, and Clayface has appropriately donned many faces and names throughout various reimaginings. With his wild origins, the influence of old-time horror films, and his remarkable abilities, Clayface is one of Batman's most powerful and long-lasting opponents for good reason. Number 14. Poison Ivy. I know a lot of people nowadays would likely place Poison Ivy much higher, and I can't say I'd fault them for it. Ivy's true name is Pamela Isley, a former botanist who, due to various reasons, has developed a hatred of most human beings, especially men. The character started out as essentially a throwback to classic femme fatales of cinema past, a seductive temptress with a literally poisonous kiss, who would seduce men for her wicked schemes. Over time, she evolved into a deranged eco-terrorist. She is obsessed with protecting every bit of flora she can manage at all costs, but doesn't care all that much for the fauna running around between the vines and branches, especially human beings. This connection to nature became even more intense over time, as Ivy became a part plant, part human hybrid, whose deadly kiss was the result of toxic pheromones in her body. Nowadays, she's probably most famous due to her on and off partnership with another character, Harley Quinn. I think this is both part of what makes me love Ivy and part of what ranks her lower on the list. While Ivy is certainly an intriguing antagonist in her own right, I like her best when she's paired up with Harley, and I think the same goes for a lot of other people. While their relationship and its many interpretations can be great, I think it's more the combination of the pair I love than Ivy on her lonesome. With that said, even when she is on her own, Ivy is a fine character, with a lot of great interpretations and stories behind her. I just like other villains more. Number 13, Mr. Freeze. Freeze, originally called Mr. Zero, is one of those characters who I think has actually been handled better by other media than the comics themselves. This treatment started all the way back in the 1960s with the Adam West TV show. Instead of being depicted as a nameless mad scientist who basically became a supervillain through his own idiocy, the show gave Freeze his now well-known name, a true identity, then Dr. Shivel, and added a new wrinkle to his backstory. In that version, Freeze's icy condition, which forces him to live in sub-zero temperatures after being doused in experimental cryonic chemicals, is due to a mistake Batman made some time ago, adding a layer of pathos to the villain and their rivalry. This was all expanded further in the episode Heart of Ice from Batman the Animated Series, which has essentially become the definitive take on Freeze's origin story. Here, the character was for the first time named Victor Fries, and was a cryogenics expert who tried to save his beloved wife Nora from a terminal illness. Due to a corrupt businessman sabotaging the experiment, not only was Nora still left in a frozen state, but Fries was transformed into the frosty Mr. Freeze, seeking vengeance on the world for his wrongs. The character has since had his powers, appearance, and backstory reinvented multiple times, with some versions being more sympathetic than others, both in and out of comics once again. Whether he's got a heart of black ice or sadness in his snowy eyes, Mr. Freeze remains a mainstay in Batman's rogues gallery and a perennial audience favorite. Number 12, the Ventriloquist and Scarface. These two have been favorites of mine for a long time, mostly just due to personal bias. I've always been a fan of puppetry and ventriloquism, and while there are actual ventriloquists of real life that I'm fond of, in fiction, usually the profession is vilified, with the ventriloquist being depicted as a madman or managing a dummy that is somehow supernatural in nature. I don't mind though, because the concept can be effectively fun and creepy, and there's no better example of the trope of the evil ventriloquist than Arnold Wesker and his unhinged alter ego, Scarface. The origins of how Wesker came into contact with his murderous dummy have changed a few times over the years, as has Scarface's amount of agency. Most of the time, it's indicated that the dummy's diabolical personality is simply the result of Wesker's own fractured psyche, but in some stories it's hinted there might be something more paranormal at work, or even a strange combo of both. Whatever the case, the two are a delightfully unlikely and deranged duo. Wesker himself typically seems like a kindly old uncle or grandfather, very mild-mannered and sweet-natured. In direct contrast, Scarface, the real boss of the duo, is a psychotic, loudmouth monster who revels in every wicked deed he does. Arnold has tried several times to rid himself of his darker half, and there have even been attempts to change up the formula by bringing in new ventriloquist characters. Ultimately, though, neither can seem to truly escape the other. Without Wesker, Scarface has no voice, and without Scarface, Wesker has no power. It's a dangerous combination when you put them together. Number 11, Bane. Bane is a villain I have somewhat mixed emotions about. On the one hand, I can't pretend he's ever been that high up among my favorite Batman villains in any form of media, comics included. Aside from the Christopher Nolan movies, but that's another story. I just tend to be more interested in the more theatrical villains, I suppose, in a lot of ways. However, I can't lie and say he isn't an effective antagonist, and he's had several good stories. Of course, the thing that really earns Bane so much merit is one particular story that I'm sure most of you watching will know: Nightfall. This seminal, massive story arc, told across multiple issues in multiple titles, was the story that really put Bane on the map. For those who don't know, the short version of things is this. Bane, determined to prove his strength by destroying Batman once and for all, sets loose a bunch of inmates from Arkham Asylum on the city. Batman runs himself ragged trying to hunt them all down, and Bane, who has strategized this with military precision, chooses the moment of best opportunity to face the Dark Knight. And he wins. Bane breaks Batman's back, and leaves Bruce Wayne paralyzed and in a wheelchair. And while of course Batman did recover eventually, for a while it was unclear what the future of Batman was going to be, and how a monster like Bane, already incredibly strong even without the super steroid known as Venom pumping through his veins, could be defeated. It was this story that really cemented Bane, and it's been both good and bad for him. Good because it certainly ensured his legacy. Bane will forever be remembered as the man who broke the bat, and that's something to be commended. Few villains have come so close to truly ending the Caped Crusader. Bad because a lot of what's come since, in my opinion, both in and out of comics as usual, just hasn't lived up to the power that first impression had, and has largely felt like it's trying really hard to find a new direction to take the character, or just waters down and copies elements from the story with mixed results. That's not to say it's all been disappointing, and I know a lot of people would probably put this beast of a villain higher. Personally, I don't think I can honestly say he's in my top 10. He does come close though, and I hope that counts for something. Number 10. Ra's al Ghul. There seems to be some debate over the pronunciation of this character's name. I've heard it pronounced multiple ways. Ultimately, I'm pronouncing it the way I am here simply because it's the one I've gotten used to. With that said, pronunciation is hardly the most complicated element of the character of the Demon's Head. Ra's al Ghul is a villain who is meant to call back to a lot of pulp-style Asiatic supervillains of yesteryear, such as the Shadow Shiwan Khan, or the extremely infamous Fu Manchu, or even Marvel's resident warlord, the Mandarin. He is depicted as a character who is somewhere between a mad scientist and an occult horror, a centuries-old extremist who wishes the world to be rid of all of its most corrupting influences and will stop at nothing to achieve that goal. Given what a cesspool of evil Gotham City often seems, it's no surprise that Ra's, in his mad attempts to cleanse the planet, has tried to pretty much eradicate the entire city on more than one occasion. Ra's is a very different kind of Batman villain. He's a sort of pulls-the-strings mystery antagonist who has his fingers wormed into all sorts of high-up and secret places, and his organization spans the globe. What really makes him memorable, though, are the personal connections he has with Batman. Not only does Bruce Wayne have a sort of off-and-on romance with his daughter, Talia, which has even resulted in a son, Damian Wayne, but Ra's himself sees Batman as the only person truly worthy to carry out his legacy. He believes Bruce is a kindred spirit deep down, someone he feels could take up the war against evil Ra's is trying to enact. However, Al Ghul's own methods are so diabolical that Batman obviously cannot condone them, and thus the two are at an internal, antagonistic impasse. Each wants what the other wants, a better world free of depravity, but the lengths each are willing to go to or not go to in order to make it happen are what set them apart. That concept will always make for interesting storytelling. Number 9. Killer Croc. If you had asked me 10 years ago or more where Killer Croc, aka Waylon Jones, stood among my favorite Batman villains, it would have been much lower. This is for a simple reason. Until that time period within the past 10 years or so, I'd read very, very few comics with Croc in them. Most of my interest and knowledge of Croc came from other media. And while there are some fun and interesting interpretations out there in the world of spin-off materials, I'm especially fond of the versions from the cartoon show The Batman and the Arkham video games, Croc is sort of the opposite of Mr. Freeze, and that the comics are where he truly shines. Originally envisioned as a tough, merciless gangster with a bizarre skin condition, Croc has evolved over the years into something far more monstrous, in more ways than one. His condition is no longer skin deep, as it not only affects his body, making him inhumanly tall, inhumanly strong, and with many other generally inhuman physical traits, but also affects his mind, giving him heightened senses and some animalistic instincts and appetites. Most infamous, Croc canonically eats people. He's a natural predator, and many of his best stories revolve around the constant struggle he goes through as he tries to balance his humanity with his carnivorous desires. In the comics, Croc has been a tragic, and sometimes not even wholly villainous figure. He'll still do terrible things, of course, but more and more often he's depicted almost as much as being the victim as he is the villain. It was due to various friends pointing out the values of his comic origins, and you all know who you are if you're watching this, that I discovered just how rich a character he really was. It's a shame that other media hasn't typically treated him with the same level of depth and pathos. At most, it's a question of whether they depict Croc as a humorous thug, a ruthless crime lord, or a literal cold-blooded animal. There's so much more to Waylon Jones than any of these versions have shown. If you really want to see what makes him so interesting, look up some good Croc stories in the comics. You won't regret it. Number 8. Harley Quinn. In contrast to our previous pick, Harley has dropped down significantly in my ranks over the years. Harley is to me what I think the film A Christmas Story is to a lot of people. That may seem like a weird comparison, but hear me out. When I was growing up, Harley was that special Batman villain that not a lot of people knew about or loved all that much, even other superhero geeks I knew. Her time in the comics had effectively only just started, and they were still trying to get a grip on the character, so to speak. Her appearances in other media were sparse. She was really best known for her original appearance in the famous animated series, and that was kind of it. Things really didn't change until the 2010s, by which point I was basically an adult or on the cusp of becoming one. And when it changed fast. I swear, I don't know exactly what happened. To try and go into it would take way too long to explore here, but it almost seemed like overnight Harley had gone from that character nobody really knew except a few loyal fans to a character that was friggin' everywhere, with stories, merchandise, and other appearances numbering the dozens. Yeah, suddenly the Christmas Story comparison is making sense, isn't it? The problem with making a character that's friggin' everywhere, and doing it at a relatively rapid and sudden pace, is that not every new interpretation is going to stick or please everybody. The Joker, for example, is also friggin' everywhere, but he's been friggin' everywhere literally since the 1940s, and really hasn't stopped in the 85 years or so history of the character. Harley has only become a huge thing within the past decade and a half, if that, out of a history spanning about 30 years. And to be honest, I'm a bit annoyed by it. I'm annoyed because the character feels almost like a caricature at this point, and that a lot of people, including those handling her creatively, aren't quite getting the things that made her truly special to me in the past. Now, with all that said, does this mean I hate Harley? Well, obviously not. She's number 8 on this list. When Harleen Quinzel is handled well, both in and out of comics, she becomes one of the most fun and fascinating characters in the entire DC universe. And even though there's plenty takes of her I don't like in general, the original, which I have always adored and still do, has a warm place in my heart. I can't bring myself to hate Harley, no matter how frustrated I get with her sudden popularity, but I don't think I can rank her in my top 5 the way I used to in the past anymore. When it gets to a point where I literally groan and roll my eyes whenever I find out the character is going to be in something most of the time, I think being in the top 10 at all is probably a lucky break. Number 7. Two-Face. A long time ago, I used to consider Two-Face a somewhat silly villain. Before you all grab your pitchforks and torches, let me assure you that is not the case any longer. I have been enlightened, and my interest in the character has grown over the years as a result. Once again, the origins of this character have shifted and changed a few times over the years, but a few basic points have remained more or less untouched. Once upon a time, Two-Face was Harvey Dent, a dashing, young, and fresh-minded district attorney who wanted to clean up Gotham and make it a better, happier, safer city. In many incarnations, Harvey was once Bruce Wayne's friend, and a sort of ally or quasi-rival to Batman, which makes the dark turn his story takes all the more tragic. An altercation with the mob leads to Harvey's physical features being horrifically scarred, with one side of his face burned, twisted, and hideously deformed, and the other side retaining his handsome features. This seems to cause Harvey to snap, as he develops a split personality and becomes obsessed with the concept of twos. Everything from symbols of duality to even numbers seems to be part of his gimmick. Unable to make many important choices in his life under the circumstances, he instead rules his actions largely through chance. If the coin he carries with him lands on its clean side up, then Harvey will typically make a good and honest choice. If, however, it lands scarred side up, then evil is the way Two-Face will go. All of this makes for a fascinating villain who, yes, can be funny, but can also be extremely interesting psychologically, and the personal ties he often has to the heroes only make the struggles with him all the more impactful. Over time, I've come to realize more and more what a special character Dent is. I doubt he'll ever be in my personal top 5 Batman villains, but he comes close. There's no doubt in my mind at all now that Two-Face is one of Batman's most formidable opponents. Number 6. The Scarecrow. This is a villain that seems more and more over time to be turning into many people's favorite Gotham rogue. I can hardly say I have any problem with that. It's often been said that Batman's best villains are dark reflections of himself, and few are quite as blatant about that concept as the Scarecrow. Inspired by Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, this Master of Fear's true identity is one Professor Jonathan Crane. Originally, Crane was an expert in psychology who once taught at Gotham University, and was especially interested in human fears and phobias. This fascination with the things that scare people soon got out of control, and Crane eventually turned to the dark side, becoming the sadistic Scarecrow. Using a patented hallucinogenic chemical simply called fear toxin, Crane is able to make people see their greatest fears brought to life. Over time, he's adjusted his toxin to be administered in many forms, and have increasingly more varied effects. Even without the aid of chemicals, however, Crane is a deliciously devious character. Manipulative and cunning, he's able to find ways to exploit people's weaknesses, emotionally and psychologically. As a result, while he's usually not shown to be a brilliant physical combatant, with rare exceptions, he's nevertheless a force to be reckoned with. In many ways, the Scarecrow is a classic mad scientist archetype, even if he doesn't always look the part physically. Everything he does is ultimately either his own twisted way of, in his own mind, furthering the cause of science and research, or it's simply for his own warped, perverse pleasures. Even if he does get money out of whatever bargain he makes, that's not his true goal. He loves to scare people simply because, in his words, fear is power. The reasons for Crane's obsession with power and pleasure through fear have been explored many times, but the point to be gathered from this is it's the reason he makes such an interesting foil to Batman. Bruce Wayne's alter ego is deliberately designed to be a figure who will frighten criminals. He, like the Scarecrow, uses a combination of his incredible brain and intimidation tactics to get what he wants. What makes them different is why they do what they do and the ways they go about it. Batman scares the guilty, while the Scarecrow mortifies the innocent. It's a parallel that practically writes itself into an intriguing narrative almost without trying, and is what makes him such an iconic adversary. Number 5. Catwoman. Nowadays, Catwoman technically isn't even considered a villain. In the comics, she's usually depicted as an anti-hero at worst, and a full-blooded heroine at best. Heck, I think she's even been part of the Justice League off and on. However, in other media, Selina Kyle is much more fluctuating, and it's not hard to understand why. The transformation of Catwoman into a more heroic character is one that's gone through a long period of evolution. She was one of Batman's first major villains, and while she was never a purely evil antagonist, unlike, say, the Joker or Hugo Strange in the early days, she was, nevertheless, decidedly on the side of wrong. There are just as many stories and interpretations of her as the bad guy, or at least as a morally gray figure you can't quite figure out, as there are of her as one of the main protagonists. So I feel placing her in the top 5 is still justifiable. Catwoman is a thief, a near-literal cat burglar, who steals primarily just for the thrill of it. She loves the sense of freedom and excitement that the life of an outlaw gives her, able to make up her own rules and do the things she wants to do without another dictating right and wrong to her. She has her own code of what's good and bad, which is one of the reasons that across other media, she's been portrayed in so many varying ways. The one near constant thing with Catwoman, no matter what role she plays, hero or villain, would be her romantic dalliances with Batman. Literally from her first story to now, Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne, both in and out of costume, have had a sort of off and on romance with each other. And out of all the different ladies there have been in Bruce's life across multiple reimaginings, in my opinion, she is the best match for him. Even in some of her most evil incarnations, she genuinely seems to love and care about him. Much like with Batman and the Al Ghuls, it's just their different philosophies on good and bad that keep them apart. Whatever you think of her and whatever she is at heart, good or evil, she's always been one of the most intriguing characters in the universe of Gotham City. Number 4. The Penguin. Oswald C. Cobblepot has had one of the most intriguing character developments over the course of his history in comics. In the early days, the Penguin, so called due to his grotesque and almost comical appearance, was a sort of gentleman thief, a dapper scoundrel with a heart colder than the poles and a greedy bird to boot. Using a variety of trick umbrellas and trained avians at his disposal, the Penguin considered himself an aristocrat of crookery, pulling off crimes with his inimitable style. However, over the years, for multiple reasons, the character transformed, and some of the more old-school elements of the character have been toned down over time. Nowadays, the Penguin is depicted as a sort of super gangster, in contrast to Batman as a super detective, a little bit like fellow Gotham rogue the Black Mask. Running his mob behind the scenes of his headquarters at the Iceberg Lounge, Cobblepot is a ruthless chess master and puppeteer, who pulls the strings in the shadows and arranges dastardly deeds to be carried out by his minions. In many ways, Cobblepot is less a dark reflection of Batman as he is a dark reflection of the Dark Knight's true identity, Bruce Wayne. A concept that's been made increasingly more blatant over time, with the Cobblepot and Wayne families depicted as long-standing rivals. Penguin is a man who believes himself to be of noble stock, and flaunts his wealth and status not truly for the good of Gotham City, but simply to make himself feel more important or get the things he really wants. Bruce uses his money whenever possible to help people in need, one way or another. I like both takes on the Penguin, the more classic and the more modern. And while his status among audiences has sort of changed over the years, it seems that at least at DC, the character has long been considered Batman's number 2 rogue after the Joker. 9 times out of 10, if they want a major Batman villain in a movie, game, or show, and they don't want to use the Joker, then the Penguin becomes the one they push to the forefront. Even in the comics, where other characters like Ra's al Ghul or Bane seem to frequently get a lot of attention, the Penguin has remained a mainstay of the Gotham Rogues gallery, and there's no sign he'll be waddling away anytime soon. Number 3. The Mad Hatter. In all honesty, I probably shouldn't be placing Jervis Tetch this high. There are plenty flaws I could name with the character, especially in the comics, that make it understandable why he's never been quite the superstar supervillain that characters like Penguin and Catwoman are. Ultimately, though, I can't help myself. I just love the whole concept of the Mad Hatter way too much not to give him a spot in my personal top 3. If you watched my now somewhat outdated History of Jervis Tetch video from a few years ago, or my more recent Top 20 Mad Hatters video, then you already know the basics on this character. The same goes if you're a major comic fan, so I'm just going to keep this brief. There have been 2 versions of the Mad Hatter in DC Comics, both going by the name of Jervis Tetch, though one of them is supposedly an imposter of the other. As I've said before, the history is a bit confusing. The first, current, and most famous Mad Hatter is a deranged supercriminal obsessed with the Alice in Wonderland stories, who uses a combination of special technology and chemicals to hypnotize and brainwash his victims, turning them into mind-controlled servants to do his bidding. The second, and less well-known Hatter is not obsessed with Wonderland, but with hats. He not only uses hat-based gimmicks as weapons in his criminal arsenal, but is obsessed with stealing hats and hat-related things. His greatest desire is to find a way to steal Batman's coveted cowl and add it to his collection. Both have a track record that's sort of hit and miss across the long-spanning history of Batman, but when the creators get it right, they get it very right. Honestly, given my own obsession with the Alice stories, and the character of the Hatter in particular, it's not really a surprise that Jervis Tetch remains a villain I hold dear in my own blackened heart. Number 2. The Riddler. At the risk of sounding pretentious,
I liked the Riddler before it was cool.
Much like the Penguin, the Riddler's reputation with readers and audiences has had sort of peaks and valleys over the years. Even as recently as 7 years ago or so, I knew people, major comic fans no less, who badmouthed the Riddler, calling him one of Batman's lamest villains. In fact, even in the comics, this fluctuating sense of status is true, as the Riddler has gone from being treated as one of Batman's most notorious enemies, to being perceived as something of a joke character, to once again rising to the top of the heap as one of the Dark Knight's most dangerous foes. Nowadays, we seem to be in one of the high points of Edward Nygma's criminal career, with him having multiple major story arcs in recent years, and being the main villain of a major movie, with many people seeming to enjoy that interpretation. There are a lot of reasons why this up and down rep sheet is the way it is, too many to go into in a video like this. Suffice it to say, I'm glad the Riddler currently seems to be getting more respect, because I have always liked this character. As far back as I can remember, he was always one of my favorite Batman villains. Edward Nygma is a man with a serious need for attention. He is a genius, at least in his own mind, if not literally, who feels a compulsive desire to flaunt his mental superiority and prove himself Gotham's cleverest carbon-based life form. To that end, the Count of Conundrums organizes his crimes as being like elaborate puzzles, and typically leaves various clues at the scenes of his crimes, often in the form of riddles and word games, hence his alias. If solved correctly, these will allow Batman to catch up with the Riddler and defeat him. If the Scarecrow is Batman's equal on the grounds of fear, and the Penguin is Bruce Wayne's warped reflection, then the Riddler is the villain who most directly and deliberately challenges one of Batman's most important titles, that of the world's greatest detective. The Riddler's clues are usually not easy ones to solve. It's interesting to have a character like the Riddler who is so flawed that he essentially creates his own worst enemy. His need for recognition overrules his common sense at times, and whenever Batman does inevitably manage to solve the puzzle, the Riddler's tantrums and other responses range from the disturbing to the borderline hilarious, sometimes at the same time. While his compulsions and moments of whimsy can be humorous, Nigma is nevertheless just as stone-cold serious and dangerously demented as a lot of other members in Batman's rogues gallery. You should never underestimate him. It might be the last thing you ever do. Before we get to our number one choice, here are a few honorable mentions. Deadshot, Anarchy, Firefly, Man-Bat, Victor Sass, The Cavalier, anybody remember him? And Professor Hugo Strange. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. My number one favorite Batman Come on, you know it's the Joker. Of course, it's the Joker. I mean, a bunch of you probably just skipped to this point to see if he was the number one, and yes. Now at this point, about half of you are probably cheering for joy, while the other half are groaning and rolling their eyes at best, or foaming at the mouth and chewing your own furniture in a state of apoplectic fury at worst. And let me just say, both sides of that perspective are valid. I am well aware of the fact that the Joker is probably the most quote-unquote basic choice anyone could make on a list like this. I know that for many people he's become a character, much like myself with Harley Quinn, they see as overused and overrated. I know that there's a lot of people who wish other villains, including many on this list, would get more attention. And yeah, I'd be lying if I said I didn't sympathize. I do wish other characters like the Mad Hatter, Killer Croc, the Ventriloquist, Clayface, and many more could have more attention from both DC and the public at large. But despite all that, I'm sorry, the Joker is still my favorite Batman villain. He has been since I was a little boy, and that's probably never going to change. I think the Joker is the character who sparked my interest in a particular type of villain. Not just in terms of him being a flamboyant and theatrical foe who mixes menace and comedy together, nor even in the sense of his twisted philosophies, acting as a self-proclaimed agent of chaos who commits crimes largely just for the sheer heck of it. More specifically, the Joker is the villain before and beyond all others who got me invested and interested in one particular narrative concept: the arch-enemy. I absolutely love the concept of arch-enemies, of two characters who practically cannot exist without each other, who mirror or provide opposition to each other in a variety of fascinating ways, whose stories over the course of time are so deeply entrenched in each other you can't imagine one separated entirely from the other. There were many such rivalries before Batman and the Joker, of course, but I would argue their particular relationship has become the benchmark for archenemies in fiction in general, especially nowadays. 9 times out of 10, when a character I'm interested in has an archenemy, that archenemy is my favorite villain, simply because the very fact they are the archenemy immediately makes them so interesting to me by default. The Joker is the one who started this trend. Virtually no one knows him better than Batman, and few people know Batman as well as he does. They constantly bring themselves to the verge of killing one another, but somehow neither feels they can really do it for completely different reasons. Each has a bizarre, twisted form of respect for the other, but they're also constantly mocking one another and enjoying each other's failures. They're complete and total opposites, yet somehow they have so many things in common. There is so much I could say about the Joker and his rivalry with Batman, but honestly, there's not much more worth saying. It's all been said before, by people much more informed and intelligent than myself, and repeating it or going into it further is sort of redundant. I completely and totally understand why the Joker's popularity and persistence would irk some people, It irks me sometimes, and I have no shame in admitting it. But even with that in mind, there's still not a shadow of a doubt that the Clown Prince of Crime more than deserves the title of my favorite Batman villain. And so concludes another entry of World of the Wicked. I haven't decided what the next countdown for the series will be, so feel free to leave any thoughts you may have. Whenever this series returns, I hope you'll join me in the realm of darkness once again. For now, take care, my lovelies, and I hope your nightmares are pleasant ones. Until next crime.